Hello, I'm Jan Newharth, Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. Welcome to First Five Now, a Freedom Forum conversation series that explores topical issues and features current newsmakers who are using the five freedoms of the First Amendment to guide their work. Today, we'll discuss the new documentary, The Reunited States. Executive produced by Van Jones and Meghan McCain, the film follows everyday heroes on the difficult journey of bridging our political divides and provides a portrait of those who have dedicated their lives to depolarization. We are joined today by the film's director, Ben Rekhi, along with David and Erin Leaverton, who set off on an RV journey across America with their three children to find out what unites and divides us. This program is brought to you by the Freedom Forum, which fosters First Amendment freedoms for all. Our vision is an America where everyone knows, understands, values, and defends the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And now, please welcome our moderator, John Maynard.
Thank you, Jan. Welcome to First Five Now. I'm John Maynard, Senior Director of Programs for the Freedom Forum. Today, it seems the political divide in this country is stronger than ever. The Pew Research Center, which for 2 decades has tracked demographic and partisan differences on a variety of issues, recently reported on increasingly stark disagreements between Democrats and Republicans on the economy, racial justice, climate change, and a long list of other issues. The 2020 presidential election further highlighted these deep-seated divides, and the events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol illustrated in graphic detail the dangers that political warfare can lead to. So, can we get beyond our partisan differences and bring people together to better understand each other? And what steps need to be taken to get there? The new film, The Reunited States, chronicles the efforts of 5 everyday heroes who are indeed devoting much of their lives to bridging that divide. The film, based on the book by Mark Gerzon, follows them as they find ways to create a dialogue and bring people from very different backgrounds to the table together to find common ground. We are joined by Ben Rekhi, who directed The Reunited States. Ben is an award-winning narrative and documentary filmmaker who's worked with the Coen brothers and George Clooney. He produced the Spirit Award-nominated feature Bomb the System, directed the South by Southwest Audience Award winner Waterbourne, and wrote the dialogues for Ben Kingsley in Teen Patty. In 2018, he co-directed a documentary series for PBS called The Hidden Vote, about minorities who supported Trump, and his most recent feature film, Watch List, was set against the drug wars in the Philippines. David and Erin Leaverton, who are both featured in the film, set out on an RV trip in 2018 to explore America's division. Over the course of 1 year on the road, Erin and David looked into the eyes of individuals from all 50 states, listened to their stories, and got glimpses into countless American experiences completely unlike their own. Today, they are working to convert the wisdom gained from their travels into multiple tools that empower others to embark on the journey of authentic encounter and personal transformation. And we'll hear more about that in a moment. Before we start the conversation, let's watch a trailer from the film.
Our country is very divided right now.
Folks were physically attacking one another.
The root causes of division go all the way down into our foundation as a country.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
Stop! Stop!
If we're going to live in a democracy, all of us have to learn to be mediators and bridge builders.
My daughter would tell you, let's get on to the issues that she died for.
The divisions are happening in our neighborhoods, they're happening in our schools, and they're happening in our families.
We decided to travel to all 50 states to get an understanding of what was causing these divisions.
Issues we'll inherit are not so much dividing between the left versus right, but really the future versus the past. We decided to create the first ever caucus for young members of Congress.
I want to create a third force in our politics that's able to get us beyond this partisan warfare.
Meeting people across the country who have a passion to see our divisions healed. That gives me hope.
To have someone look at me as if we don't deserve to be respected, we don't deserve to be treated fairly, it does something to you.
We get uranium, we get murder, we get alcohol. Nobody's doing nothing about it.
I wish there was something I could do to help her.
I don't want other mothers to go through this.
This country needs bridge builders.
Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who might not believe exactly like you believe.
Ben, David, and Erin, welcome to First Five Now.
Thank you.
Ben, let's start with you. Yeah, tell us why you decided to make this film and how did it all come together?
You know, we started this journey 2.5 years ago, thinking that we were at the bottom of where our divisions would take us. And, you know, looking back now, I guess that was wishful thinking. We never could have imagined the world that it would come into in this moment. And the film kind of started with the question, which is, am I part of this problem of division? And are things I'm doing maybe adding fuel to the fire? And kind of that personalization is what helped frame everything that followed. Because if you noticed the through line of the characters and David and Erin, along with Susan Rowe and the rest, have all come to this realization that, you know, there's a role that we have to play in overcoming division. And that narrative is not one that we hear very often. We're often told, you know, those people are the enemy or they're the problem. And we see the worst sides of both parties, both on the elected leaders and the most extreme wings of the supporters. And that 10% of the people take up 90% of the oxygen. But there's another narrative, which is a lot of us want to move past this and are tired of this hostility and can't live with this division in our communities. And there's people that are finding solutions to that in every corner of the country, in every town and city, that are actually holding this country together through this very difficult time. And so the Reunited States was just a way to profile a few of them, shine a light on those stories, and help give people hope that there are solutions and there is another way.
Before we meet David and Erin, tell us, Ben, how you've heard of them and how they became a part of the film.
Sure. I had the film is based on a book. It's inspired by the Reunited States of America, How to Bridge the Partisan Divide by Mark Gerzon. And Mark is, you know, kind of the godfather of this cross-partisan movement. He's been doing this work for the past 30 years and has mentored so many people, one of the founders of the Bridge Alliance himself. And he introduced me to Dave and Erin while they were already on their journey, and was said to me, you know, out of all the time I've been doing this work, I've never heard of anything as extraordinary as what they're doing. And I got on the phone, and within the first conversation was completely blown away by the conversations that they were having and the experiences that they were going through. And also their kind of clarity that they were able to articulate some pretty complicated issues that a lot of us are wrestling with about race and about inequality and about the different versions of America that we live in. And I went to meet them and, you know, ended up following them with the camera for the rest of their journey.
David and Erin, let's talk about the journey. This was obviously a pretty big decision to make this road trip. Tell us how it came to be.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it was an enormous decision. You know, you don't just kind of lightly quit your job, sell your house, and move your family of 5 onto a 400 square foot RV. That was definitely a big decision, to say the least. But the problem that I saw in America that was truly breaking my heart was worthy of our lives, of a sacrifice to some degree. I mean, from having spent over a dozen years in politics and in government, I began to see a war that was brewing that I felt could bring America to its knees. And I knew that to address the problem, what we were seeing, we really had to find out what was the root cause of it. Otherwise, we were just doing symptom management. And it just worked out, and I have an amazing bride who, is part of the idea behind truly taking the drastic step of selling our things and moving on to an RV, who was up for the adventure. And it was an adventure of a lifetime, and the people we are today are hardly recognizable to the people that we were when we began this journey.
Yeah. I'm curious what the reaction was from your friends and other family members. What did they say when you told them you were doing this?
Yeah, it was a sort of a wide gamut of responses. Everything from, oh, that's interesting, to you're crazy, to wow, that's really inspiring.
In the South, we get a lot of, oh, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. Bless your heart. But, we weren't really, at that point, that the ship had sailed, and we weren't really looking to our friends and family's responses as sort of a green light. We just knew this is something that we needed to do for us. And so we moved forward with it. But I will say, John, that the first night on that RV was one of the worst nights of my life. It was so scary because, you're actually classified as homeless when you live on an RV. And I didn't know that until I started living on an RV, and that really freaked me out. But, I look back and I wouldn't trade it for anything because of the journey that we got to embark on, and the lessons we learned and the people we met. They're our heroes.
Yeah. And we'll talk about some of them in just a moment. What an experience for your three children, young children. How did, I know in the movie you're saying, you excited for this trip? And she's like, yeah, but how did they do?
Man, they had no idea what we were getting them into, and there's a decent shot they're going to require some counseling later in life. But, when we pulled our 2-year-old out of his crib, he's still in diapers, and we put him on a fold-out couch on an RV, and the other two were 5 and 6. And they didn't really kind of know any better, I guess. I think they just thought this was kind of normal behavior. But what was amazing is that their lives were also forever changed by this journey, that we took them along with us on this journey and allowed them to learn and listen to, some of the challenging parts that were just really pressing us in on all sides and challenging our very beliefs about ourselves and about this country. And, one example would be on our second state. We're in Little Rock, Arkansas. And if you're in Little Rock, you got to go to Little Rock Central High School and talk to a man named Randy who works for the National Park Service. He's one of the specialist people in America. And Randy was telling us about these kids who are not too far from our children's age, who were so brave and were going to go and integrate Little Rock Central High School, and what happened to them and the threats they had. And he was talking about there were threats of them being lynched, and our sweet little 5-year-old with pigtails looks up and says, "What's a lynch?" And, this is one of those things they're not talking about in a lot of kindergarten classes, but our kids began to understand some of the systems in place that have led us to where we are today, and how some of their classmates and their ancestors and their grandparents have been treated in this country. And so their view of this world is so wildly different than ours was growing up, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Probably not a lot of 5 and 6-year-olds can say they've been to all 50 states either. So
not at all.
Not a lot of 70-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A question for all three of you, and I'll start with Ben. Why do you think it's gotten so bad as it has in terms of Americans becoming so polarized? Can you pinpoint a moment or an issue that has brought us here?
Well, I think it goes back to the formation of this country. To begin with, there are two great sins. There was the genocide of Native peoples and slavery, and we never fully dealt with either one. There was no reconciliation to acknowledge the injustices that had happened. And so they've been perpetuated and manifest over time. But when you talk about the political divisions, one of the interesting things that Mark Gerzon pointed out in his book and in his work is that the increasing polarization tracks pretty closely with the end of the Cold War and the fact that we lost this common enemy, this superpower overseas that kind of brought us together, we turned our enemies inwards, and that trend has only grown through time. And, more recently, you could talk about the last 4 years where, is Donald Trump a symptom of the problem, or is he the problem himself? Probably more likely a symptom of being able to articulate a pain and anger that a lot of the country was feeling. And even more recently, the pandemic. I think, we're social creatures, and the fact that we can't be around the people that we love or our friends, we need each other like we need food and water. And so there's a huge level of anxiety that's happening now that exacerbates all of this. And, it feels like that's why there's this tinderbox effect, and why we saw so much passion flooding into the streets last summer. And it feels like until we can be back together again, that we're all lashing out at each other. And so that's another factor that's made it worse.
David
John, we
or Erin,
started
I'll
this
ask you.
journey and really had this hypothesis that if we could just get Republicans and Democrats to sit down together over dinner, we could heal these divides that we're seeing over a meal, because we'd start to see each other as humans and not this enemy that they were made out to be. And what we learned really quickly is that our political divisions are really a symptom of something much deeper. And that as we kind of dug deeper and deeper, well, what's the root of that? What's the root of that? What's causing that? We realized that, the brokenness in this land is not going to be healed over dinner. It was kind of a very naive thing for me to think at the beginning. But when I began, let's just say in state number one, and you sit down with somebody who is telling you about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, where 36 square blocks were basically demolished. This was Black Wall Street. This was the most thriving communities, probably the most thriving African-American community in America. Was firebombed from the air. Just it's a real important story of our nation's history. But you don't just get over that over dinner. We haven't asked Jewish people across the country to get over the Holocaust over dinner or something. There have been massive atrocities that have been committed, acts of terrorism that have been committed over generations, that I think we really have to look at if we really want to see healing. This is not a Donald Trump problem. Now, I think Donald Trump, and I'll put the blame on both sides from having worked in this political machine, both sides are very guilty in deepening the divides and turning us against one another. But the problems on which we stand today are not new. I think they've been exacerbated recently, and they're shined a light on more, maybe because of our media and social media and such. But these problems are deep. They're heart wounds. They are areas of just deep injustice, and you don't get over injustice with a good hamburger or something like that. I think maybe that's a place to begin a conversation, but the work of this is going to be hard work ahead of us.
Yeah.
And staying in Tulsa, and Erin, I'll ask you, there was a highly emotional meeting, and I still get choked up remembering that scene where you met with the woman who lost her child, African-American woman lost her child, basically being ignored at the hospital door, right? She's experiencing complications. Obviously a moving scene. Tell us how that affected you, and even going on with the rest of the trip from there.
Yeah, John, that day changed my life. I can look at my life and sort of see where I was going before that moment, and then after that moment, everything changed for me. And that really set me up to ask a different question going into the rest of our journey, because that was state number one. Michelle's story so struck me at such a deep level as a mother. And I think there's something about mothering that supersedes political affiliations, geographic location, socioeconomic situation, and even race, because there is this deep, deep thing that you feel as a mother that cuts across all societies, if you will. And when she told me that story, something clicked for me, and I realized this is not a one-off story. This is not this woman playing a race card. This is widespread, and it's not out there, it's in here. It's in us. This is a problem that exists inside our hearts, where there's some strange belief that one person's life can be less valuable than another person's life. And that makes us sick as a society. And that's a belief system that we've been writing for a long time. I mean, we're built on that belief. And so the rest of our journey for me was about asking the question, how did it get this way? And what can be done to reverse it? I don't think, like Dave said, we can fix this stuff by just coming together and having a dinner or saying the word unity. There's so much heart work that needs to be done, because like I said, the problem is inside of us. It's not, we've passed legislation. We've had an African-American president, we've removed slavery as a legal institution in this country, but that doesn't fix the problem. And so what I realized honestly on our journey is that I am a racist, and that I have racist beliefs flowing through me that exist deep in my subconscious. I would not, in my cerebral thinking, say, oh yeah, I'm a racist. But when I'm driving past an African-American man walking down the street and I lock my doors on my car, I'm judging him based on a series of beliefs that have absolutely nothing to do with reality. And so you have to pause when you have these moments, and we all have these moments, to ask the question, why am I doing this? And how do I stop doing this? Because I'm judging a fellow human being unfairly and unjustly. And so, we have a lot of work to do, and it runs so much deeper than we realize and than we think. And the only way to find that out is to sit with one another and hear one another's stories and be vulnerable and be willing to be seen by one another. I think that's the key, and that's the hardest thing.
Right. Ben, let's discuss some of the other people featured in the film, including Susan Bro, who you mentioned at the top. She's the mother, of course, of Heather Heyer, who was killed in Charlottesville in the violent aftermath of the Unite the Right rally. Tell us why it was important to include her in the film, and what is her message, and what motivates her?
Yeah, of course. Susan, in many ways, was the inspiration and the jumping off point for wanting to make this movie. I had the good fortune of seeing her speak at an event and was really struck by the fact that she could have suffered this terrible tragedy of losing a child on the front lines of division and come out the other side as a voice of reason and saying, we need to have these difficult conversations to prevent other parents from losing their children. And, a lot of parents lose their children all the time, but we're not paying attention to them because of the color of their skin. And to have that clarity and self-awareness in a time where people are just so angry and shouting at each other really spoke to people's hearts. And I approached her and I said, I think your wisdom can help people right now, because a lot of us are lost and emotional. And she graciously agreed to allow us to tell her story. And her story really is making sure that her daughter's life mattered, and that it's not about, her saying her name. It's about paying attention to the issues that she died for. And again, having that level of self-awareness to say things like, the only reason people paid attention to me is because my daughter was white, is incredible, kind of clarity and speaks to this moment. And so, she was very, very gracious in allowing us to capture some deeply personal moments. And I know it's been tough for her to do that because it opens up, this trauma, but she's doing it because she thinks it'll help other people heal. And that's incredibly generous. The other two stories in the film, Stephen Olakara, who founded the Millennial Action Project, the son of immigrants who has walked into Capitol buildings all over this country and mobilized the future of lawmaking. It's just a testament to the power of this country that his parents weren't even born here. And he started this coalition of lawmakers that are under 40 that are committed to working across the divide. And they're coming up with real world solutions to our problems. And it really just shows this next generation is tired of what they're inheriting. They're like, we don't want this division. We just want solutions. We need to see results. We have this national debt. Our planet is in peril. We don't have time anymore. We're going to figure this out, whatever it takes, even if that means working across the aisle, breaking some rules. And Greg Orman, the fourth storyline, independent candidate for governor of Kansas at the time. He also ran for Senate with the idea of having one or two independents in the center of the spectrum would break the gridlock that any one party had. And so he ran for Senate in 2014 and almost won against Pat Roberts, and really showed how close and possible these things might be. People always talk about the independent being a spoiler and having the effect of, by voting for the person you want, you might actually help the person you like the least. And within one conversation, he turned my mind around about that. And there's a lot of electoral reforms. If there's one, the two parties don't agree on anything except for keeping other people out of running. And so that is something that might need to change. I mean, he sums it up as, if we're a dysfunctional family, if America's like a couple on the brink of divorce, maybe we need a counselor, and maybe independent politicians can do that. Maybe they can mediate this. Maybe, we can't do it on our own. And so the idea with the film was to show that there's no one way to overcome division. There's a lot of different journeys and paths that people are on, but they all arrive at the same deeper truth, which is we have that power within us. This isn't something that our government can necessarily fix for us alone. We have to take responsibility as citizens to do that change every single day of our lives. And we just hope that that's inspires people, that there is a movement out there that is, it's not just red or blue and pick a side and battle it out. There is another way.
I'm inspired just listening to you, man. You keep talking.
Yeah, it's good. Go Ben. Ben for president.
No, it's, I mean, you guys too. I mean, when I hear you, it's, I've told this to you before, but the frequency you guys are operating on it's been a pleasure to learn from you and interact with you guys.
Mm.
David and Erin, I'm curious if while you were on the road, did you meet up with any resistance? Were people like, I don't want to, I feel this way and I don't want to talk to anyone else about that have opposing views with me?
Yeah, that was probably one of the tougher conversations of my journey. It was about our sixth state or so. We were pulled into Savannah, Georgia, and we're in the middle of the Deep South. And by this point, we've heard that racism is a thing. We really weren't aware of that before. And so I was really trying to kind of learn more about this issue. And we're in the Deep South. And so I reached out to an African-American leader in Savannah who was 85 years old. So you think about the world he was born into in Georgia, Jim Crow, pre-Civil Rights Act, pre-Voting Rights Act. This is, man. And so I call him up, just, cold call. And I'm, hey, we're on this road trip hoping to bring unity to America and heal the divides. And I really would love to talk to you about, your story and your journey and how we can unite America and have reconciliation, all that kind of stuff. And I could just really hear him over the phone rolling his eyes at me because there was just none of these kind of, feedback that he was tracking with what I was saying, which made me really uncomfortable. And I probably talked even faster. And then at one point he just stops me from talking. He goes, David, even if I had time to meet with you, I don't think I would. I said, okay. He goes, it's hard to be reconciled with somebody who has a boot on your neck. And it floored me. It floored me in so many levels. I had no words after that. I think we just ended the conversation awkwardly after that. We never met each other. But as I sat and processed that, and have done so since a million times, is there are a huge number of Americans who wake up every day in this country with a boot on their neck. And that is not okay in the America that I love. That is not the land of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for him. And that should trouble us all, that there are our fellow countrymen, our brothers and sisters who wake up every day without the opportunities that we have of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the fact that I was connected in his viewpoint and his lived experience with the person standing over him with the boot on his neck. And that was hard for me to reconcile, that I was a part of a system that has placed a boot on his neck and put me on top. And it helped me look at the whole thing so much differently, that this is not a kumbaya, hey man, can't we all just get along? It's a process of, I need to see how that boot is manifesting across this country and do everything in my power to remove the boot from my brother's neck. Do whatever I can to maybe help him up, or give him room to stand up, give him what he needs to stand up, and then we could have a conversation about healing and reconciliation. But I learned that sometimes these conversations of unity are real premature, especially kind of in the perspective of just kind of like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant that I am, that has more blind spots than I do have eyes.
Yeah.
Erin, any surprises on the road that we didn't see in the film that
Yeah,
traveling to
I
50
think
states?
for me, one of the bigger sort of takeaways is how little we hear the Native voice in this country, and how vital it is for our survival. I mean, these people are our hosts, and we have never honored them as such. And the most incredible leaders and voices that I met, honestly, who just impacted me in the most profound ways, were the Native people, who have had to fight tooth and nail to maintain even an understanding of who they are. And, if there's one gaping hole, I think we're making some progress when it comes to exploring acknowledgement, when it comes to the treatment of people of color in this nation. But we haven't even touched on the treatment of Natives, and what's been stolen, and how far back it goes. I mean, I'm talking like 1400s with the doctrine of discovery, and this idea of manifest destiny, and that we can just take things and make it better because, I don't know. And the church is implicit in all of this as well. Us coming from a background of faith, like that piece of it overwhelmed me and put me into a state of shock throughout our journey. It's something I'm still unpacking. And I am so thankful that I have Native voices in my life I can go to and ask, how are you processing this? What do you think about this event? Because no one is hearing the Native perspective, and it's so important. So I would say that's one of the bigger shocks and takeaways for me.
We just have a few minutes left, but Ben, the Freedom Forum every day works to foster First Amendment freedoms for all through our initiatives, programs like this. How does the First Amendment guide your work as a documentary filmmaker and a storyteller?
It's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because on the one hand, filmmaking is telling a story, but on the other hand, it's deeply listening to stories and trying to reproduce them truthfully, so that others might experience what you were there in the room to experience. The film, I did a series before this called The Hidden Vote that was about minorities who voted for Trump. And, there was LGBT for Trump and Muslims for Trump. And the idea was that, media has been part of what's been used to divide us, but it can also be what brings us back together and allows us to see and hear each other again, and just the nuance of all the different perspectives that are out there. And so for me, I think it's incredibly important that we have a diversity of ideas, and filmmaking and the role of story in helping us to see and hear each other and walk in each other's shoes is incredibly powerful. I mean, I know Erin talks about this a lot, that someone's most precious thing is their story. And, ever since the beginning of time, or at least our species, we were sitting around the fire sharing stories because that's how we made sense of the world. And that's still the case now. And so for me as a filmmaker, I just really want to try and tell the stories that challenge us, the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world around us, because it's incredibly powerful. And I don't think that it's being used consciously most of the time. I love a good entertainment piece and stuff, and I love a big blockbuster to watch. But the films that really, for me, that are worth making, that of spending years of my life on, transform people. I hope that this film can be a small part of that conversation about providing a path forward for us.
And David and Erin, I was thinking of the freedom of speech, one of the five freedoms of the First Amendment, when I was watching this movie and seeing you speak freely with so many people. I wonder if you had any thoughts on the First Amendment and your involvement.
The first thing I would say is we had no idea when we set out on this trip that there's no way we could have done this in the way that we did it if we were not white. And so I think that's something to really think about in terms of freedom. Like we had the freedom to move freely about this country on an RV and walk into people's offices and homes and feel completely a sense of belonging and almost ownership. And that I don't say that in the sense that, oh, it belongs to me, but it didn't occur to me that I always felt like I belonged until someone pointed out to me that they wouldn't. And so I think if we're going to talk about First Amendment rights, I think we need to talk about the fact that it has been disproportionately applied to a certain portion of our country, and that's us, and there was an article that came out about Ben and him being, having the background that he has,
South Asian,
being South Asian, and I so applaud the fact that he is a storyteller and that he's having success in this country. We need more of that. So that's my takeaway on First Amendment. We need to apply the First Amendment to all our citizens, not just some.
And my takeaway is probably that I'd taken it for granted, I think, for a long time, this idea of these freedoms, because I think they just had always been there. But I feel like today, our First Amendment rights that we hold so dear, they're not guaranteed for the next generation. And why I say that is I believe this whole thing rests upon our healthy democracy. And I believe our democracy is in real peril right now. And I think that the First Amendment, along with many other things, could fall in our lifetimes. And what happened on January 6th at the Capitol was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. For a lot of folks, it was pretty predictable. It was a continuation of violence that has been happening across the country as well. But I believe this time should serve as a motivating factor for all who love the First Amendment or the Constitution in itself, that we either get to choose to take up our arms and be a part of this fight to destroy the other side, or we can turn our swords into plowshares, to lay down our arms, to open our hearts to our neighbor, to maybe our other, maybe to our enemy, and to be peacemakers and to save this democracy. And if enough people don't do that, I've got a lot of concern for these freedoms that we hold, like right of freedom of religion and speech and peaceful assembly. These are things that our generation and generations before us, many of us had taken for granted, but I don't think they're guarantees going into the future.
Yeah, I think we can use speech to destroy ourselves, or we can use speech to find a path forward. So we have this freedom of speech. We need to decide how we want to use it. I think that's big.
Well, that was well said. We're out of time. The movie is The Reunited States. It is now available on demand. I highly recommend it. It's an incredible piece of work. Ben Rekhi, congratulations on directing that film. David and Erin Leaverton, wonderful participation in the film. Thank you all for joining us today on First Five Now.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John. And check out the website, reunitedstates.tv. A lot of resources there for folks to learn to talk to family and friends about politics.
Excellent. And for viewers, thank you for joining us. For more information about our programming, always visit us at freedomforum.org. And again, thank you for joining us for First Five Now.